Welcome back to the Lars Larson Show. If I told you that the people in one state had a money-losing government operation and it had fewer users and much higher costs, and they were losing money by the millions every day, but they want somebody in another state to pay that cost, you'd say, well, Lars, that's kind of crazy. Except that exactly describes what's going on. TriMet is the transit agency for the Portland metro area. I don't think it's much more fiscally responsible than, say, Sound Transit in Puget Sound. They both waste billions of dollars on transit projects that are not carrying nearly enough people to actually justify those projects. But TriMet, while it's losing money, has said, we want to build billions of dollars of new projects, except we'd like to find somebody to pay the tab for us. Representative-elect John Ley joins me now, who follows this issue closely. He's now been elected to District 18, Position 2 in the Washington State Legislature. John, welcome back to the program.
Hey, Lars. Thanks for having me on. Just when you think the Interstate Bridge project can't get any more ridiculous, they come up with something else. And in this case, they want Washington State taxpayers to pay their operations and maintenance costs for a 1.8 to 1.9 mile light rail extension. It's absolute insanity when both states are having alleged budget deficits and they are unable to fund their own transportation. A different aspect of this whole boondoggle is they're asking for that $22 million that you cited earlier.
$22 million a year, not one time, right?
That's exactly right. And in reality, that is more than triple the actual O&M costs for light rail. So they're telling the project, we want to fudge the books and demand Washington State come up with more than 3 times what we're actually paying to operate the system. And Greg Johnson and the Interstate Bridge Replacement Team don't even bat an eye. They don't check the veracity of those numbers. They just pass it along. And right now, the Vancouver mayor is begging the C-Tran board of directors to go beg Olympia for the money. Well, This elected legislator says not only no, but heck no.
Yeah, and in fact, when they beg it from Olympia, they're saying, can we get everybody in the state of Washington out of the general fund to pay to meet the costs demanded by another state for this project? There was one number I didn't have, John, because I think people should be stunned to begin with that it's as you said, it's 1.83, maybe 1.9 miles, and it's more than $2 billion in the estimated cost. Assuming they finish at the estimated cost, they may finish a lot higher. It's already the most expensive light rail project on planet Earth at $1 billion a mile. But how much of that project actually is in the state of Washington? Is it even half a mile of the 1.9 miles?
Well, they're saying any number of things, but rough wag, it's about half of that, which would be about 9/10 of a mile.
9/10 of a mile.
We still don't know exactly where it will end. They're saying an Evergreen Street overpass, but we don't have the exact location of how they will end that. Those details are not forthcoming yet.
I mean, it would be crazy enough if they said we have 10,000 feet, roughly, 2 miles of light rail, and it's going to be for 10,000 feet. The operations and maintenance is $21 or $22 million a year, but only half of that actually sits in the state of Washington. So it's almost as though TriMet said the minute we can touch ground on the north side of the Columbia River, then Washington State owes us a giant chunk of money to finance a project of which 99.5% sits in the state of Oregon.
Yep, and in reality, they're drawing that line in the middle of the Columbia River for divvying up the costs. It's just such a Ponzi scheme. And as you and I have talked many, many times, what we need to do is get this in front of Elon and Vivek and the Doge Committee so that they can pull the plug on the federal funding on this.
That would kill
And let's put this to rest once in a while.
Let me ask you something about representative government. You're now a newly elected rep to go back to Olympia as a state representative. There are representatives on the C-Tran board. Didn't the C-Tran board take a firm position on what they were willing to pay on operations and maintenance quite some time ago?
They did. A couple years ago, they said that the C-Tran board, would not be responsible for any of the operations and maintenance costs of light rail. Now, you and I would have wished they would have taken that stand saying no Clark County money. They didn't go that far, but they said none of C-Tran's money would go for it. Sadly, a month ago, they reversed that position, and last week they were faced with the reality of them reversing that objection, and suddenly the numbers hit them like a freight train, and there was huge consternation by members of the board saying, what on earth are we doing? And the Vancouver mayor pivoted and said, let's go to Olympia and ask the state for a bailout.
So that's Ogle. By the way, I sent her a note last night, the mayor of Vancouver, and said, will you come on the show and explain why you would go to Olympia, ask for money from everybody in one state to pay for a project that sticks about 1 mile into Washington state? But there's more outrage, too. TriMet has said, we need to buy new trains. How many new trains do they want for this 1.8 or 1.9 mile extension?
They're demanding 19 brand new vehicles for this extension. Basically, 10 new cars a mile.
So you suspect that what TriMet is doing is saying, we're losing $800 million a year, TriMet is, and we don't have the money to pay for this, so let's get Vancouver or Clark County or the state of Washington to buy the vehicles. They're going to almost exclusively run in the state of Oregon, right?
Exactly right. And another part of this outrage is TriMet has said they want basically $10 to $15 million per vehicle to buy those new vehicles. Yet earlier this summer, they just got done paying $4.5 million per vehicle. So they're jacking up the price triple for what they just paid for these new light rail cars. There's so many facets of this that are a huge ripoff. And frankly, taxpayers in both states ought to be screaming bloody murder and heck no.
Yeah, and in fact, I think I've told you before, I think the whole project is dead anyway because the Coast Guard still hasn't signed off. I don't think the Trump administration in transportation is going to sign off. The two states together, even with the federal money they have now, have barely half the money they need to build the project, and they're planning on starting construction when? 2026?
Yes, exactly right. That's when they hope to put the first shovel in the ground. But between now and then, they've got the Coast Guard to approve this, which you and I hope and suspect they're not going to approve a bridge too low. They're hoping to get the Federal Transit Administration to approve another $1 billion, which hopefully won't happen under the Trump administration. And they've got their own huge problems. Oregon's got a $3 billion funding shortfall on their 2017 transportation projects, and Washington State has well over $1 billion that our WashDOT is begging for just to keep our roads and bridges safe. Both states shouldn't be wasting money on this boondoggle.
No, and in fact, there was one other issue I wanted to ask you about, and it just slipped my mind. But I know what I want to ask you about. This has been voted 3 times in Clark County. 1995, I think 2012, 2013. They voted on 3 times, and the voters said no every time. Any chance of getting it on the ballot?
Well, the C-Tran board talked about increasing the sales tax for this light rail O&M if they couldn't get the state to bail it out. And I have no doubt the voters would say, heck no. Far too many people are already having a tough time making ends meet. And that swerves into another facet of this.
Hold on a second, John. That's John Ley, who's representative-elect heading off to Olympia. We'll talk about that another time.